Good.
All right, guys, welcome to today's webinar. So this is our ID Masterclass. I know most of the people I can see on the call here have been to quite a few of these before, so you know the drill, I'm sure. This follows on the theme of the month being trust, building a platform of trust, which, you know, those of us who have worked with teams or have been in teams, everyone says that the number one ingredient that you've got to have in order for a team to start to become anything close to high performance is, you know, a strong level of trust. We specifically call it out as a foundation of trust because I know of people who have said, well, I thought we had trust. You know, we worked together for years. We knew each other well. I thought we had trust and then we didn't. And so trust isn't just something you can magically have. You might think you have it. I think a lot of people have camaraderie that camouflages as trust. And so in order to have a foundation of trust, the metaphor for me is it's like a table. The trust is the actual table, but the legs of the table are the things that hold up the trust. And we think of them as core or key protocols around trust. So we'll dig into them. So it's about building a platform of trust as an enabler for high performance teams. I'm going to quickly refresh on what we covered last time. And then this class, we're going to dig into an extension of that work, particularly around, last time was more around what you need to have. This is going to be more around how do you really do it? How do you do it for the team and how do you do it for yourself? Now, being the masterclass, before we kick into the topic, we of course do our check-in on our peak performance indicator to just, which I'll just put up on the screen here. I think, actually, I maybe won't because I think all of us are familiar. No, I will put it up. Where are we? Let me just grab that. So this slide, for those of you who are new, is just explaining that when we are in stride and true to ourselves, we live life along this green arrow. And when we are pulled out of stride, which is what the arrows pulling out to the left and the right represent, those things, no one's necessarily doing it intentionally. You know, society shapes expectations for how you should live life, whether you are male, female, older, younger, you know, there's parents, there's just right and wrong ways that invariably society has shaped. But the same within our family, there are family values that shape us to do things a certain way. Same in our, you know, school system, in relationships, there are expectations to get formed based on how we were raised or what we believe. And all of those things don't necessarily align to our own natural instincts. And so when people first learn about their ID, it even comes up that others will say things like, oh, but I don't see that in that person. I don't see them showing up like that. And it's not that the ID is wrong or anything about the person is wrong, but if people aren't showing up, if people aren't in stride and being true to themselves, then of course they're not going to show up the same way as their ID indicates. And so if you want to live a life that is fulfilling, meaningful, bringing you the joy and the contentment that all of us seek, and those are the things that we've got here at the top of the chart, you achieve that purely and simply by living your life in stride with your ID. When you go out to the side, left or right, depending on how far you get pulled off track, a tension builds up inside that eventually is unsustainable. Now, not only do you get robbed of the things at the top of the chart, but you start to experience along this horizontal axis various symptoms of out of strideness. You know, initially it's just in attitude, temper, behavior, emotion like anxiety, but eventually it starts to take its toll in a much more physical way, to the point where people notice things changing about their body, whether it be in their energy, their immunity, their skin, their respiratory system, their digestive system. You know, it could be headaches, there's sleeplessness, there's a whole range of things that we've tracked over time that occur physically, and eventually gets to the point where unless they take medication or some other significant intervention, like a total change, they change roles, they change relationships, they make a life change and turn things around and start coming home, the green arrow here representing home, then until they do that, they don't really get to the root cause of whatever the issues were. And so we have this model. We call it your peak performance indicator. We call this process a PPI check-in, where we just say to ourselves, and some of us do this every day, we encourage people to do it often. As a team, you would probably do it once a month. As this community, the ID Masterclass, we do this every month when we check in for this class. And we just ask the question, on a scale of 0 to 10, if 10 was living life on that green line and a 1 out of 10 was way out to the left or way out to the right, what's the number that comes up for you? And what I'd encourage you to do is just put your number, as you can see, some people are already doing, put your number in the chat as to what number, what just comes up for you today. Might be a different score tomorrow to what, and might be different to what it was yesterday. And it could have been different to what it might have been this morning, prior to the meeting you might have had that took you up or down in terms of your score. But just what we find is the best leaders and the people that really live with real self-awareness, this is something they think about often and, change things around so that they can meet their ID needs and get back in stride. So you can see in this case, there's a lot of high scores. We've got, starting from the top, Greg, you've got a 9, Cliff an 8, Alona an 8, Ian 9, 9 for Peter, Judy 9. They're very high scores. Grant, you're an 8, nice to see. Julianne an 8, Pam a 7. It's a lower score for you, Pam, what you normally would be. Tyler an 8, Denise a 7. Gus, that's a good score, 9, 7.5 for Davey. So we can see, and I would say today, I would put down my score would be 8.5 to 9, somewhere around there. The average score when we do this in a team is 6.3. So these are higher scores than what we would typically find. And then what we have found is when a team shifts from an average of 6.3, I've lost the call.
Falls Creek. He's at Falls Creek.
No. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, my apologies. I've got good service. I don't know what happened, but anyway, clearly not good enough. So when I lost my train of thought. So I'm just going to stop and invite anyone to make any comments about their score. Maybe what's behind it being high at a 9, or if it's lower than normal, what might be going on for you that has, compromised the score today. Who would like to share?
I will share, because I just had an experience. I was on a phone call before our call, talking to a person I respect, and I wanted to talk with him about a decision that I have coming up. And so we talked. And what I find frequently when I talk to people is I really don't feel heard. And so I noticed that after I got off the call with him, not feeling heard, my score went up, because I thought, my language, screw it, I'll do it myself. I'll figure it out myself. I went right to driven to complete.
Good for you, Judy. Good for you. I mean, maybe he gave you the gift you needed.
So I can't figure out what that gift is, Paul. Is it, that I need to have more trust in myself? Yeah.
I think we might have lost him.
He's muted.
You're on mute, Paul.
Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. I didn't see that. I was saying, Judy, there was one time I asked somebody for help and they refused to give it to me, and I felt really disappointed, but it just drove much more initiative on my part. And then in hindsight, I went, you know what? He gave me the best help he probably could have ever given, which was to not help, you know? And so maybe that's what your friend did inadvertently for you, and good on you for rising up from it and, you know, having the courage and the initiative to just go for it. Maybe that was the gift.
That's a
Look at
possibility.
your score. You can test it by your score.
Yeah, because I feel better now than before I got on the call with him.
There you go. There you go. Have more confidence in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean, you know, unilaterally don't ask for help, but it means acknowledging that whatever happens was the best thing to have happened. You know, if you didn't feel heard, it wasn't a letdown. That in itself was a gift. Had he heard you and helped you, that would have been a gift. You know, it's just choosing to look at life, that whatever it dishes up, you see it as meant to be and perfect. I love that concept. Life is perfect. The only reason we don't think it is because of how we choose to see it, you know, but otherwise it is perfect. And if you look for it, you find it. So good for you. Anybody else want to comment on their score?
I will. You're
Okay.
right. Not normally that
Ben.
low number, but really, I put in the chat. I said it was a 7, but really, I'm probably like a 6 today because I just got some news that really halted all of my momentum. It was so negative, and it just brought me to a halt. And I've got a very forward-moving ID, and when I feel like there's a loss of momentum, loss of opportunity, it really puts me at a lower number. So the good news is I understand what it is. And I just sometimes even not having a strategy, but just knowing this is what the problem is really the best thing, because you're not looking for what's the issue. So I've identified that's what it is for me. It's just a matter of working through it.
Or pivoting. It's a really beautiful thing about your ID, Pam, is once you pivot and go to the next thing, if it's positive, you sort of move on, you know, and it's still there. You might have to come back and revisit it. But even this call, if we have a great call now and it's positive and uplifting for you as a person experience, it could totally change your score. And I say that for anyone who's an avoid complete improvised style of person. If you just pivot, I remember someone saying to me, it's just a quarter turn. You just take a quarter turn, you know, meaning just pivot to the next thing. If it's positive, that will lift you and probably give you the energy and the confidence to come back and deal with whatever the issue is, but from a very different, more empowered place. Thanks, Pam. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Hope you're okay with the news too, by the way. And if there's anything I or anyone here can do to help you work it through, just brainstorming, just
Yeah.
You know, reach out and lean on us.
We can talk about it later.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Gus has his hand up, Paul.
Okay.
Gus's
Who has?
question.
Oh, Gus. Thank you, Gus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Earlier today, I would not have given myself a 9, but as I approached this call and then realized I actually let the time pass and was 2 minutes late, that once I got here, I just felt like I'm just being me. And that's why I can have a 9 today. That I don't have to pretend, I don't have to imagine, I don't have to improvise. I can just be me. Thank you.
I love the simplicity of that, Gus. Thank you for sharing that, because so
welcome.
much of our stress is when we're wrapped up in trying to be something for somebody else. So that is just that you could let go of that. Are you saying that coming to this call is what gave you that feeling of the freedom to be you? That you knew in this call
I was on the way, but the call has helped me recognize it, identify it, and speak it.
Good for you. I remember we started these calls back at the beginning of COVID, and I remember when COVID was sort of, easing out, I asked the question, should we continue? And I got this hell yeah from people, because they were like, no, we need this call to just check in and remind us of some of these principles so we do stay in stride. And it's obviously been a delight to do them ever since, and we continue to learn and just be reminded of the fundamentals like what you're doing there, reminding us of that. So thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to go to the start of the class. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, you're good.
Oh, here we go. Okay, thank you. I'm just concerned about my audio, but anyway, so I'm just going to quickly revisit the slides from last time, just to level set for some of you, particularly who weren't in the class, but I'm not going to dwell on them. There is the recording from the previous session. If anything here you want to understand more deeply, please just go back and listen to some of those so we can then move on into the body of today's session. So when we talked about trust, here's what we wanted to dig into. What's the impact of having a platform of trust, what it looks like when you have it, and how does ID play a role in accelerating the development of trust? So I showed this slide, and the essence of this slide was to say, when you build a team, the default behavior in a team is not one of trust. The behavior is one of suspicion. And
I'm not seeing slides.
Anyone is.
Does everybody else see? Nobody sees slides. Sorry to interrupt, Paul.
All right, Ian, or have you got the slide? No, you probably don't have to. Have you got the slides, Ian?
From last
show
time?
them instead of me.
Yep, just give me a second.
Please. Okay,
Sorry.
I'll stop sharing.
I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No worries. So I'll just keep talking while Ian then throws up the slides. So,
yep.
So it's even if you've got a team of 12 people, everyone is really trustworthy and trusting. When you put them together in a team, the team takes on its own energy. It has its own sort of, it's an organism of its own. So that dynamic that happens in a team is one of suspicion, and you don't actually get to a place of trust unless you do some work to specifically build trust. And so what happens with teams, the natural pathway, as you can see on the slide here, you might just put it into a show, Ian, thank you, is to go down that southern axis, where things get sub-optimized or fail. If you want to build a platform of trust in order to have the real conversations and genuine collaboration that drives innovation, that drives success, there needs to be a pivot that you make. And we're saying the ID plays a really significant role in helping create the environment within which trust can be built. Because when people, like to Gus's point, when people feel free from the judgment of being able to show up and be who they are, it lowers the guard, it allows them to feel more, have like a permission or a freedom to be more vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, be more authentic. So if you move to the next slide, Ian, here we start to get into some of the principles. So when you think about the behaviors, I should say, when you think about what do you see when you have trust, these are some of the things that occur. One is you don't jump to conclusions, you assume positive intent, you have curiosity rather than criticism. People tend to have the same conversations outside the room as what they're having inside the room. They cross-represent each other, and they start to volunteer their time, their talent, their resources, their ideas. Go to the next slide, Ian, please. All right, so and go to the next one, and just talk about these two together. So thank you. So what's the role of ID? The first is, I've sort of spoke to it quickly before, it basically allows people to not only show up true to themselves, but see others through a different lens. And that sense of non-judgment firstly creates a different dynamic. And secondly, it just allows you to interpret people more correctly. So people, to Judy's point, feel more heard. And when that occurs, it just changes the way people show up and starts to drive a different dynamic in terms of vulnerability and authenticity. And that's the key to successful teams. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ian. So here we get into the trust protocols. When I talked about the 4 legs of the table, these are the things, if you want to install trust in a team, these are the things you need to have. The first is create an environment where people can show up in stride. And that's, you know, the idea obviously helps with that, but it's important to do a check-in, like what we just did, because invariably people won't all have the same score. And some people might need just to even be acknowledged, like with an empathy for where they're at. They don't need you to necessarily solve their problems, but just checking in so that you first make sure that everyone's in a good place. Secondly, assuming positive intent. It's very easy to jump to conclusions, especially I find with either verifiers or where you've come to know people over a long period of time. You tend to jump to a conclusion because you think you understand them, and maybe this time they're coming from a different place. Stay curious rather than criticize. And lastly, you make sure that if you're not having the same conversation outside the room as what you should be having inside, call that out. Call it out for yourself, but call it out for others as well, because that's one of the key indicators that trust is wobbly, is when people are not having the same conversations outside as inside. I'll just stop there in case anybody has any questions before we move on. Take yourself off mute if you do. Okay, so just jump ahead 2 slides, please, Ian, and let's get into today. So here's a matrix for talking about how trust relates to your ID. But what we want to talk about now is, like, how do you really do that? When I say you, I don't mean a generic you, I mean you. I want you to think about this for you and your ID. You know, and this is going to now shift more to a conversation amongst us all rather than a presentation, because this is where you can help each other by being more specific about, like, if trust is built over time for you as a verifier, just take the top one. How much time? How much time do you need? You know, is it months? Is it weeks? What is it for you? It might be a similar number for all verifiers. We might find in a minute that it's wildly different. Vacuums erode trust. So how often do you need to be kept informed? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Does it vary? What would you say? So I'm just going to probably the easiest way to do this is just to go through the drives and have you explain, for you to build these things out, for you to meet these needs, what do you specifically need? Like, what's underlying, what's something more specific about each of these that gets into the how behind the what, as it were. So let's start with the verifiers. How long does it take to build trust, and how often do you need check-ins and so on? Who would like to comment?
It's kind of the events rather than the time. So it's not, you know, it can, I guess time can be a factor, but it's what happens in their time is more important. So I think time is can be short, can be long. I think it's really what do you do together, right? And it can be like this morning when I came in here at 5:30, had a quick phone call to a colleague in the US. That sort of thing builds trust for me as well. That wasn't necessarily that wasn't strictly a 100% work meeting. You know, he's moved there not long ago, and we chat how have you settled and what's going on with the family, and then we talked a bit about the work as well. It's really what happens in that time for me rather than how long.
So Paul, another way I've looked at this, and I'm not a verifier, but I looked at it from a verified perspective, but I think it actually blends in through all of the drives. And I've asked people before, what are your trust currencies? So what does it take for you to earn, if I came to work for you tomorrow, what would it take for me to earn your trust? And people say things like, time or do what you say what you do. So sometimes asking it that way, like what are your trust currencies, might get more conversation going. I don't know.
Yeah, great. Let's ask that, and you might just use the chart then to as a prompt.
I would say for me, I'm just a 6, so it's not super intense. But I would say I can trust quickly, or when I'm asking questions, so I'm speaking to the question bullet, it's more I am looking for ways to trust, not for ways not to trust. That makes sense. I want to find the things that I know I can trust and validate and what clicks in for me.
Are you on mute, Paul?
Yep.
What's going on to me?
Sorry, I was just saying, Pam, thank you for sharing that. Just following on from Patricia's, framing of what are your trust currencies, as your strongest drive is the 2 incomplete. What would you say your trust currency is, and how does it relate to the avoid complete?
Probably flexibility. That's a big one for me. So I'm looking for somebody who can be flexible. Will find a different way to do things. That all plays into my avoid complete. And it's a good call out because yeah.
I was going to ask, a lot of people think that trust is built on integrity, and, do what you say you would do. And I can see certain drives that would automatically connect to that. How does that sense of integrity around trust relate to an avoid complete? Or flexibility, to be more specific? Or does it not?
I think for me as a 2 incomplete, if people don't trust that I will, get it there, even if it's not their way, then I feel like it's not that I don't trust them. It's like they introduce an air of mistrust in the relationship. Like it creates like a mist in the air of mistrust. It's like, no, I might not be doing it exactly the way you're doing it. I'm doing it this way. I think it's really going to work, and it's going to meet all our criteria, and it's going to be quality. And as soon as you're like, but why didn't you, or there's a process or when it feels like restrictive, then there's an introduction of an air of mistrust.
Oh, that's so well said. Thank you, Alona. Yeah, I can see that. So when people are focusing on querying the path rather than focusing on the goal, given that you're more outcomes oriented, right. Yeah, that brings in that air of mistrust. Thank you.
And I really trust people who, without criticizing or shaming, are like, okay, let's just recap the 5 things we're going to hit, or here are the non-negotiables that you know what I mean? So that they're like triggering me in a way, they're supporting me by making sure we've got the non-negotiables, but there's no tone of, you're a kindergartner, I can't believe I have to tell you this again. And I know there's I have to own my own stuff around that, but that really builds trust because I know they have my best interest at heart, and they're not, then I come into the avoid verify. They're not judging me for how my brain works.
Thank you. That's really good insight. Thank you. Denise, you're going to share something.
Well, I'm thinking here as an avoid complete, for me, life happens. And sometimes there are events and circumstances that impact a deliverable. And I'm like, okay, just keep me informed, right? In terms of developing trust, my trust is broken when someone does not keep me informed because I think there's a motive behind it, right? I'm not always assuming their positive intent and not telling me. If it's a matter of respect, if you share information with me, you're telling me that I'm important. Heads up, Denise, this is what's going on. communicating with you so that you can continue to contribute, because your contribution and the work you do is important.
And,
Okay,
So my-
thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I think that's that whole vacuums cause concern, Denise. I love how you explained it. My sense is, and Paul, tell me if I'm wrong, that might come from use verify, like that absence of information. But I think it's exacerbated by other things. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
But to that same end,
Yeah.
I'm just
There is
go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's a natural thing for a verifier that if something's happening and they're not informed, you just question why, but the why takes you to more of a negative place than a positive place. So that's why the vacuums, impact trust, and you feel bad because the minute somebody explains their reason and it's a positive reason, then you feel bad for having gone to that negative place. So that concept of staying curious rather than critical is a particular call out to verifiers and me specifically. So yeah, that's where that sits.
Yeah, Paul, Steve here. Just building on Denise's comment, the vacuum for me erodes trust. I find my complete drive, I trust early, but if there's a vacuum or inconsistency, trust goes really, really quickly. And I've heard a comment which I've used before: you become professionally skeptical. And I've heard a CEO mention that before, where you begin to second question people. It feels like you don't trust them because you rely on quality of the information, or that someone does follow through and do what they say they do, because you make a decision based on that information, and then you sort of go out on the limb. And when they let you down, you sort of then have to explain yourself. So it becomes very uncomfortable. So you become that professionally skeptical, and doesn't build trust. Yeah, so the vacuum for me really, when I trust early and quickly, it's once you break it, it's very difficult to get it back.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. Can we talk about that a little bit for the avoid verifiers on the call? We talk about you giving trust right from the get-go. But help us understand this a little bit more. Like, is it 100% trust? Does it require you to have a gut feeling first that says yes, I can trust?
Yeah.
How does it actually work?
Yeah.
Patricia.
Absolutely. I mean, my gut will kick in immediately, and it's 99% it's trust, but then it can get eroded with my other drives. Like if people don't do what they say they're going to do, or if all the other drives. But it's my gut will kick in, and most of the time it's trust. But when it's not, it's like hard stop.
Yep.
So is all or nothing?
100%.
Yep.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think people think that we're good.
I was gonna say, when you lose it, it's like you're dead to me.
And I think people think that we're naive to trust early, but our radar picks up all kinds of information, people's body language, what kind of words people are using. So it's not that there's nothing behind whether we trust. I mean, I think we do tend to lead with trust, but it's not trust in a vacuum. So I call it data informed intuition. Someone said that once and I'm like, yep.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was, I was trying to speak on the last call we had too, but I think it's our other drives, like that incongruity around the authenticate. Like the gut is, I'm going to trust, but I'm like constantly picking up, they said this, but they move that way, or they're facing this way or something like that. And it just kind of like goes into, are they presenting themselves as real to me in a way that I can trust?
And your authenticate is stronger too.
Right.
Well, and so far we're hearing from people who are avoid, verify, and authenticate. Cliffalona and Patricia. I'm wondering how it would be if someone was avoid, verify, and avoid, authenticate, because the avoid, authenticate drive is a very forgiving drive. It's sort of factors in all of those ambivalences,
Yeah, we
So
have
I'm wondering
Olivia.
how that would work.
Yeah, I don't know if Olivia, I know she's muted, but she's a 4357.
I don't know
I'm
whether
sorry,
you
what was
could
that?
comment, Olivia.
Sorry, the
Just
audio,
commenting on what
audio
it's like. Maybe someone else could explain the question rather than me, so in case my audio is playing up for her.
I think what we're looking for is when you're building trust, there's those of us who avoid, verify, use, authenticate. We were talking about our gut and how much of it is informed by like visuals and body language and some of those things. And Paul's like, what if you're avoid, verify, and avoid, authenticate? Where there's, how does that play out? Is that the question, Paul?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I see you guys as authenticators quite absolute. You know, it's like 100% trust or not, and so they're gone. But there's a forgiveness factor with the avoid authenticate. I'm wondering how someone like Olivia deals with that. You want to be all or nothing as an avoid verify, but then you're very forgiving. So can you explain it for us, Olivia?
Yeah, so I feel like for me, I have naturally I have like pretty rigid and black and white thinking. I often find myself like trusting my gut, when it comes to trusting whether I should like trust other people. I look for like body language and like speech patterns. But what I find as I don't know if this is probably something that I have done as I've gotten older, because I feel like when I was younger, I very much like leaned into like, oh, I 100% trust this person, or like they have lost that trust, or I don't trust them at all. I was like very, very like, those are like the three buckets. But now I feel like I tier my trust. So if I feel like someone is not, if I like get a like just like not a very good feeling from them, or my intuition is telling me that they are not fully trustworthy, then I will tier the level of open, like my vulnerability levels and the trust that I will allow them to like access. Like for me, I don't know if that makes sense, but like basically I will keep people at arm's distance until I can really decide, whether that's like through whether they prove me right and I'm like, nope, they weren't trustworthy, or whether they prove me wrong and I'm like, oh, they were trustworthy. So I feel like that's kind of what I do, or what I have like learned to do. Like I said, I think like as a pretty rigid black and white thinker, typically my go-to is, yes, I trust you, no, I don't. But as I've shifted.
You helped me, if I heard you correctly, the minute you started talking and you said you look for things like speech patterns. I can see that's a real difference between the authenticate and avoid authenticators. Authenticate would say, no freaking pattern, it was your speech. It was the word you said. I mean, you said this, as opposed to looking for the patterns, And I as an avoid authenticate myself, I definitely am a pattern person,
Yeah.
So the forgiveness is, you said it, but it wasn't the words, it's the patterns that maybe you look at to then keep you 100% or 0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Olivia, I'm very, very curious. My sister's a down, down, up, up, which is a little different from yours, but she's very absolute once someone has broken her trust. Like she slams that door and puts the padlock on it. I'm just wondering how that is for someone who's a 4-3-5-7.
I feel like for me, it's, again, I think probably if you had asked me that question like 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have been like, oh, it doesn't matter what kind of like betrayal, they're done. I'm done with them. But now, trying to like lean into gray areas. I really try to, my wife is a mental health worker, and so done a lot of work in our family around some of this stuff, but really trying to kind of assess, like, was this a betrayal on like a grand scheme where this person is someone I no longer want to be in community with, or is this something where I just need to reassess the level of trust and access to me that I'm going to share with them. So like ultimately, like if they are, you know, again, if it's like a large scale thing, then maybe that means like, no, I'm not going to be in community with you anymore. And if that's like a work thing, then I have to really make some, you know, bigger decisions. But if it's like in my personal life, you know, it's a little bit easier, it can be. You know, but I feel like, yeah, I feel like I have really tried to do work around assessing, you know, what reaction is really due based on the level of betrayal. I'm like putting betrayal in quotations. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
That's a great question, because it does
Thanks,
sound
Olivia.
like yeah, I really appreciate it. It sounds like at the beginning, it's like, yeah, done, right? But that you're really working on that. So I think one's drive and one's behavior.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I think you really got it, which is so true to your idea, Olivia. What you started explaining was the essence of it right there. That, you know, the difference between looking at the words or actions people use, and instead looking at the patterns of those to then still get the same conclusion of whether you're going to be 100% in or out. You know, I think that's the essence of it. What about the improvised drive? We haven't talked about the improvised drive. How does trust connect there? I'm curious about, you know, as I said, so much of the time we connect trust to integrity and people doing what you say you would do. So how do we, those people who are strong on improvise, let's start there and then we'll talk about avoid improvise, or just call it out when you explain it, wherever you're coming from. Let's talk about your trust currencies as an improvise or avoid improvise person. Or do you just move on and it's not that significant to you?
Well, for me, the use improvise is about, if you're going to slow me down, then I'm not going to trust. That's kind of where I come from. That. And as Olivia's pointed out, I've worked on that, but I know where it comes from when it dings me.
I would say for me, it's negativity. And I don't know if it's I stopped trusting them or I just don't want to be around them, which is part of that too. Elon laughing. But yeah, for me, it's a lot of negativity just kind of makes me walk away, which I guess is trust. I don't trust them anymore. I don't trust that they'll have my back. I don't trust that they'll, you know, yeah.
For me, it's similar that the positivity, the enthusiasm, the, you know, we can achieve crazy big things. And if that's not there, then my motivation to be around them is gone. And so I don't even think about trust. I just don't want to be around them. And trust doesn't really come into play anymore because I have to put so much effort into just being present. So that's what I work on, is being more present, and then the trust will build over time.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't know that a lot of improvisers think through the trust lens, you know, but they don't want to be around them is more the point. Where I think it comes up, though, is in a conversation is two levels. If you feel it's going to be negative, you don't trust that you can speak openly without being ridiculed or demeaned, or so there's a trust element there. But I think a bigger one is when this thing about someone having your back. Will they have the courage to take the risk and defend you or support you in front of others? You know, if they won't do that, that really impacts trust. Whereas I think when someone has your back, but especially when they're not a risk taker and they stood up for you and put their own reputation at risk, or their own, not safety, but their own, you know, ego at risk on your behalf, like that's huge for building a connection and relationship and the trust within that.
Yeah.
But there is a big thing about just not wanting to be around
Yeah.
the negativity of that, isn't there? Yeah.
So, and I don't know if this is, I mean, it's trust, but it's weird. So let me just work through it. My husband's a 2. I never trust his first response. Because his first response is typically no. And it is somewhat maybe negative, but then he typically will come around. It just happened out in the front yard right before I got on this call. He said no to something I suggested, and then five minutes later he was doing it. Because he needs to think and process through it. And I get that, but so now I don't get pissy with him anymore. I just don't trust first response, and I kind of walk away.
Which gives him the time to process it and come back with his more, thought through, probably his more legitimate response, which is the one you now, know is coming type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think that then from an avoid improvise perspective, that makes, like, I do that as well. But if someone kept pushing me to do it,
which
that
I
would
used to.
Yeah, but no. But if you let me think about it, and then work out how I'm going to, then it'll happen.
Yeah.
But but I think it's like that. Tried to sell me on it. No,
that erodes trust then, right? For you.
That will erode trust.
Yeah.
If you're trying to sell me on something to convince me to do it, no, you're just writing it off. But if you put it there, I might immediately, as Wayne does, say no, but then think about it and go, oh, actually, if I do it like this, I can make it work. Don't try and sell me on it.
Patricia, can't she trust that he needs to think about it, and that you can trust that his no is his way of saying, "Give me a moment."
Yeah, I mean, I don't trust his no anymore because I do.
Yeah, I think it's a bit. I think we're a bit tough. We don't believe it yet, and then we go, "I don't trust you." Like it's like not to believe it. Yeah. Not to believe it, and therefore. Exactly. Yeah, I think you still really do trust him. You just need to give him.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's just weird that I don't trust his first response.
Well, that's a learned behavior. That's a strategy to not, pushing harder.
And I would before I would, and then he wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, Greg's saying something different. That's really significant here. He's saying you do trust his first response. You do trust that it's not his real answer, and that if you give him time, he will come up with a more legitimate answer.
The right answer.
And that's really, you're right. Yeah. and that's really, it's really important because it could completely change the way someone else then occurs to you in the relationship and reacts to you. Like imagine if you said to Wayne, I don't trust your first response. And he probably won't hear anything more. He just he's gone, Whereas if what he hears is, it's funny, the more I've come to know you, what I trust about your first response is it's not your finished response.
Yeah.
Not your final response. Like that lands so differently. I think it's a great call out, Greg.
It is. Yeah.
It's like I learned that from my 5-year-old grandson. When I wouldn't do something immediately for him, he goes, "You're not my friend anymore." I trusted that wasn't really true, right? It's like, yeah. And I said, "Well, let me know when I am because I've got some great ideas." and so I think what I'm hearing a lot from going on now this morning is that we will never know when we've lost someone if we're trusting our own instincts. We need to check in pretty regularly when we see some signal that goes, "Oh, I've lost them." And it's never really that important. It's just that they've heard it a different way and they didn't know what we meant. But this trust thing is so fragile. It's amazing.
You bring out a great
What about for the avoided? Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, Greg brings out a great point because it's important to really have the conversation with the person to ask them what they really meant and intended.
Mm-hmm.
And no, we'll just go down a rabbit hole. Never mind.
Yeah.
And what Paul said about the 2 ways that something could be said and the way it lands, I just find so much importance in the words that we use And as you just mentioned, Pam, to ask a question, let me find out if what I heard you say is really what you meant, or it's asking some kind of question to clarify, rather than just thinking you got it and taking off and go down a whole different path than the person intended.
Curiosity, not criticism.
And seeking out the positive intent. There's always a positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, guys. I think I'm lost me.
We can hear you, Paul.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious for the avoid improvisers. Do the avoid improvisers, you talked before, Ian, about pressure will erode trust. But if we use the same concept that Greg was just saying, if you know someone's going to apply pressure, they're an improviser, or is there a way you could reframe it so it doesn't create a lack of trust?
Well, for me, it's probably going to come back to my verify, how much money they've got in the bank, because they would have built up trust over time, or have they been adding to it or withdrawing from it? So if I haven't, I've worked with that person, so I'd sort of, I think that to me sort of does it. If I know the person really well, it's like, what have they banked trust with me, or have they withdrawn too much, or they're overdrawn on their account? But that's very much the verify. The improvise. Again, yeah, I haven't got anything immediately. Just avoid improvise, because I keep coming back to it. Just really depends on the person, on how. If it was someone I didn't know, it would be more difficult. If someone I knew, then I'd probably be just assuming a positive intent, that there's more to it that I'm maybe not hearing, seeing, and just be more open to it. But it would be very individual.
I'm not saying this is the answer, but I'm just wondering whether it's something like this. If someone's putting pressure on you, instead of it being interpreted as pressure and therefore eroding trust, could it be that this is pushing me into my uncomfortable zone, and that's where the zone where I normally grow? Because almost every avoid improviser says to me, when I grow the most when I'm uncomfortable. Yep. And although I didn't like it at the time, I look back and I feel like, well, it was it all worked out really well. Is there something like that, a little bit like the way Patricia is saying she's come to learn that Wayne's first response isn't his final response? Is there something like that you can do?
I would say, yeah, there is. I think it's my approach is pretty much, what have I got to learn here? What am I missing? If I have a real strong reaction, I feel like I'm being pressured or something, I'm like, that there's a lesson here. What's the lesson? But again, it comes back to a bit of time. If that person if the pressure was still being applied continuously, that would be harder. Whereas if they sort of were applying their pressure, but then I had a bit of time to think about it, was what I was saying before, then you start to reckon, well, okay, no, there's a lesson here, there's more to learn. But
yeah, I'd say pressure in itself wouldn't erode trust either. It really depends what it's about, because what they're doing might make a lot of sense. I might actually agree with the line they're taking, even if it puts pressure on me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pressure in itself is not the thing. I think
it's an interesting point, Peter, because I reported to a high 7 who had lots of good ideas, and as a complete drive, I was very supportive and completing and supporting them, and when they weren't around, had their back. The trust got broken, not from the pressure, the trust got broken when they eventually, the 4th or 5th item that been called out from, because like I do risk, but I'll put forward risk. And I think when Trish said before about her husband's first response is negative, I will also put out what's potentially the risks of this particular initiative. And if that's not respected, once you see it fall over 3 or 4 times, you basically say, well, I'm providing no value here and I don't trust what they're going to do because they're going to fall over again. So I ended up I resigned out of that position because it was unworkable, because my complete drive, it showed up to support the person, but they just went off in their own way. So it broke trust and broke the relationship.
That's
so what is it then if it's not pressure?
Well, it's the outcome for me, Paul, was where the person was making decisions and I was visibly supportive of that. When the thing fell over, they then went on to the next thing, as high improvisers do, which is not a problem, but left me carrying the bucket. And after a while, you had to explain at a senior level. You said, well, I'm not having to continue to explain for someone else's mistakes. So it was really their actions when you're out there supporting them makes you look not the person or the character you desire. So therefore, I walked away from it.
What I was going to say after Ian, and it leads to this. For me, it's not. It's if there is no recognition of the quiet behind the scenes effort that are put in and achieved, as an avoid improvise despite all the circumstances, and suddenly that's as you say, not recognized, or someone else might take credit for it, or move on or rubbish it or anything. But it's that quiet achievement effort that happens with the avoid improvise. If that isn't recognized, then really I have to say you've lost me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's more like it. I mean, we can articulate that, and I'll make some adjustments to the slide for us. But that makes much more sense, where you're being left holding the bag or not recognized for the dirty work that you might have had to do. Particularly if it's someone else has made the commitment or it was their decision. That makes a lot of sense.
And if it
so guys, we're right near the end of the time. So I just want to summarize a couple of things that have come out of the call. Firstly, for the team, there are definite behaviors to look for that indicate trust. They're on the slide. And there are key protocols that are legs of the table that hold the trust within the team up and solid. What we've spent time learning about today also is what is it for you personally, and that this matrix that Ian was showing shows that trust has different currency and different meaning for different drives, and we need to be cognizant of those. And what works for us doesn't work for others necessarily. But also check in often, because even when you think you might have been honoring their needs, you might have missed something subtle. And just the checking in shows a care factor that could both disarm any concerns, but also build or rebuild the relationship. So it's the checking in often is one of the key mechanisms to building and maintaining trust. With that, let's bring today to a close. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Stay tuned for the next invitation. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everyone.